So our next speaker is Stephanie Noble. She's an assistant professor at Northeastern University. She's also a research affiliate in radiology and biomedical imaging at Yale School of Medicine. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Katie. And Mac, thank you. That was really lovely. I'm glad to be here with Mac and Mike today. So I was invited to talk about cultivating collaborations that complement your postdoc to faculty research program, specifically because I've just been through this transition myself. I only joined Northeastern this past summer in July, so it's a bit fresh in my mind, and I'm really excited to answer questions as well if you guys have them. All right, so I'm kind of talking a bit more from the perspective of postdoc. I think this is relevant for many different career stages, and specifically for early career stages as well, from late stage student to early stage faculty member. But I was told to gear this a little bit more towards postdocs, so you'll hear a little bit more of that relevant advice. As you know, you're often called trainees, even though you have all this experience, and many of you are ready already to run your own labs. But we do what we do. So a postdoc is a really great opportunity because you have a lot of freedom. You get to now focus on the stuff that matters the most to you. It's also the final training step before you actually launch your independent research career. And what I think this means is this is a great time for you to think about what matters the most for you. What are the gaps in your training? What are the gaps in the sort of scientific questions you want to answer? And what do you need to fill those gaps? So there are tangible things from a professional development standpoint, such as maybe building up your publications and talks to be competitive for a faculty position for the job market. There are also a number of intangible things, such as networking, and that's what I'm going to focus a lot about right now. So I think of networking as something that benefits not only your career. You'll hear a lot of talks about, networking strategically and doing this for very strategic reasons. But I think a lot of us will really respect the fact that your research really is benefited by networking, by building out your network and working with a lot of different types of people. I think especially for this field, we're respecting the idea that the better science we can do really requires large teams, large data sets, or connecting different types of methodological expertise. So I think that it's really important to think that this is both great for your research and for your career. Again, good science doesn't really happen in a vacuum these days. It's not like one person is going to collect 1 million subjects and all the best methods and release that to the community. I think that's not quite how neuroimaging works. And this opens doors as well to many diverse opportunities. You'll meet people who will be collaborators on papers or grants, maybe open doors to other job opportunities as well. And on that note in particular, I want to say anecdotally, we hear that this is one of the most essential steps for many people in the field in obtaining faculty positions, not necessarily that they were offered a faculty position by somebody that they knew, but perhaps somebody that they knew put in a good word for them or knew about them, or multiple people knew about them when there was an opening and said, oh, this person seems pretty great. That's not just for landing the faculty job, but this is also important throughout your career. This is something we hear about for getting tenure, for other opportunities for moving jobs from one to another. So it's anecdotally reported to be sort of a key component throughout your career. But that's all well and great to say do networking, but it's sometimes hard to think about how exactly you can actually go about doing this. So we're going to talk about a few strategies. I want to add this disclaimer. It's definitely not an easy thing. Some people might also feel that this is a little bit extra challenging for them than for others. But I just encourage you to keep an open mind and a positive attitude. And definitely there are things that work for some people that might not work for you. It's a good idea, I think, to just find what works for you and keep going at that. So here's some very general advice before I dig into a few more specific pieces of advice. One is that I would just say maybe challenge yourself a little bit more to sort of push your boundaries just a bit, whatever's comfortable for you, but just pushing a bit to engage yourself, to engage with the community and put yourself out there just a little bit more, maybe than what you may have historically done or just gone with the flow. Something that I've heard a lot is that it's especially helpful to challenge yourself to give a few more talks if you can, within reason. You know, you want to get sleep too. You want to make sure that you have time to do other things. But there's this really nice presentation by Jay Van Bavel that talks about the job market. And he talks about, you know, network aggressively, giving lots of great talks. And I've heard that advice a lot. And I think it has been kind of helpful to see somebody come up again and again. You've seen that they've given a talk here, a talk there. It just sort of sticks in your mind a little bit more. So don't have to go crazy. If it doesn't work for you, that's okay too. But maybe, you know, challenge yourself a little bit more in that direction. I think it's also helpful, as sort of a big principle, to just keep a closer eye on whose work might complement yours. That might be somebody that you reach out to in the future, might be somebody that you talk to at a conference. But I think that's a great thing to keep in the back of your mind. So now, after some of this general advice, we'll jump into a little bit of specific advice, specific venues where you can build your network. So one is, you know, where we're all at now, attending conferences. So I'd say this is great for meeting a lot of people all at one time and space. This is also, I'd say, the most tiring of all the options that I'm going to talk about. You have lots of different options when it comes to conferences, and all have pros and cons. So you could pick a small conference or a large conference. Smaller conferences, you can get really close interactions with people. Larger conferences, you might just run into more relevant people. Virtual or in person. Since we're talking about expanding international collaborations, I just want to highlight the fact that a virtual conference is really great for expanding your global network. Some cons are that not all virtual conferences can be very successful, as we've seen through the pandemic, but some can be really great. I think some of the more open science-oriented conference venues have been a little bit more successful in this respect. They tend to have a little bit more of people who are willing to engage with technology, or people who are like very open collaboration oriented. So I'd encourage you to check out, you know, BrainHack, OHBM Open Science Room, which often has a virtual component, Neuromatch Academy, and stuff like that. I'd also encourage you, while you're at the conferences, we all attend the talks, but one of the most important aspects of conferences that you'll hear across career span is the social aspect. So there are both formal socials that are organized by the conferences, like the SB SIG social last night, but there's also all these informal gatherings. And I'd encourage you, again, as I was saying before, to try to, you know, join some of those informal gatherings. Put yourself out there. People love to meet each other. And then I think over posters and after talks is a really good time to meet people. So if you're presenting yourself, you know, you could consider asking your fellow speakers or your fellow poster mates if you want to grab coffee or drinks or ice cream to celebrate, whatever works for you. If you're attending a talk, you might stop by afterwards to tell the speaker that you enjoyed their talk or to ask a question. Again, people tend to be quite friendly. Everyone has their own different personalities, but I think by and large, you'll find that you're much more successful than not when you approach people in this field, I think. So another great opportunity is to attend a postdoc seminar or a visit if you're a postdoc. This gives you a great opportunity to refine your job talk and build your network. And sometimes you'll get experience with additional professional development activities, such as one-on-one meetings with faculty, which mimics the job talk. And many universities have postdoc seminars. You can just Google neuroscience postdoc seminars and you'll find many. And you can generally just reach out yourself and ask them if they have an opening. Even if there isn't a formal postdoc seminar, again, people are really welcoming for you to reach out and to ask if there's an opportunity to give a talk. If you do end up in one of these situations where you get to give a postdoc seminar or a job talk, it's great to, you know, inform yourself before visiting. You might visit specific faculty websites or institutional websites before you visit. You don't have to go crazy and become a detective and know everything about every person, but just having familiarized yourself with some people who might be relevant to your work or, you know, who might be sort of tangentially relevant, I think is very useful. So another great opportunity is thinking of grants and papers that you could be part of as an opportunity to build your network. You might think that, you know, a certain person that you want to work with is too important or busy, they might not be interested in your work, but I think that that's something of a misperception. As Mac was saying earlier, many faculty really, really enjoy meeting and mentoring young scientists. A lot of people report that as their favorite part of the job, and I'm finding that to be one of my favorite parts as well. But yes, of course, everybody is very busy, buried under mountains of admin and emails and everything else. So a few tips I would say is, when you reach out, you can express some enthusiasm about their specific contribution, just to get them in the mindset that you're valuing their expertise. And then emphasize, that it could be a low time commitment if that's true. I think in many cases, there might be a low time commitment for an additional mentor or an additional collaborator on a paper. And you might want to give people, plenty of time, a soft deadline, tell them you're flexible, stuff like that. And again, if you don't get a response, people are just very busy. They don't think you're a terrible person. They're not very sad that you've reached out and you're imposing on them. Just try again. See if they, might be responsive the second time around. If there isn't clear enthusiasm, I would say that's when you might consider that it's time to move on. But at least try. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight in this particular topic that training grants are a particularly fantastic opportunity to build your network in this way. It's kind of expected, actually, for many training grants. It might not be said explicitly, but there's sort of this soft expectation that you could reach out to an external collaborator or an external mentor to kind of help expand your network. And this is a perfect opportunity, a perfect excuse to reach out to someone that you've been really excited to work with and say, could we work together on this project? All right, so here's a slightly controversial one, developing your web presence. This is something that I actually talk about yearly at MGH with regards to developing your social network web presence. And that's one that people feel lots of different ways about. I'll talk about that in a sec. But I would say a must-have is to have a Google Scholar profile. It's very easy. You just basically sign up. A website. And to build websites, you can look at peer websites. What have people in your immediate cohort done, or people who are just at a level above you. You can just look at their websites for inspiration. There are lots of ways to build out a very simple website. Weebly, for example, or some other kind of web platforms that are very easy. You could use GitHub if you're a little bit more comfortable. GitHub Pages is super easy to work with as well. So just sort of see what resonates with you and find a medium. And then I would say, I would strongly encourage people to consider engaging on social media. There are definitely big pros and cons. But I would say here are a few examples of a few tweets that I saw recently where people are hiring or sharing materials for going on the job market, or just funny random stuff at the bottom there. I would say Twitter is the bigger platform, for better or for worse, these days. There's a lot more of alignment with open science principles on Mastodon and Blue Sky. The community is growing there. It's not quite as big, but I do think that there's a different vibe that's very nice. So it's worth considering what aligns with your principles and what you're interested in. So why would you do this? I showed a few tweets here that might be relevant to some of you. You can keep up to date on papers. People put together these really great tweet threads that sort of summarize papers, so you can kind of keep up with the deluge of information that's always coming at our faces. You can keep up with news. You can keep up with the opportunities like what I showed here. And that's really important for all of us, I think. You can hear hot takes on interesting topics in the field. And then you have the opportunity to engage with other people and to sort of be part of the community, but at your leisure. You're not sort of at a conference, which is a great opportunity as well, but you're not having to do everything in 1 week. You can just casually engage maybe 1 month, like a couple times a month, and then the next month, whenever you feel like it. And I'll say, I also encourage you to be kind. People do notice personalities online. And that might be important for future collaborations and other things. So again, a couple disclaimers to this. I already mentioned a few, but one is that it doesn't work for everybody. Some people are not really interested in what social media has to offer us. and some of the big negative impacts on our mental health and other things, I think that that's a really important thing to consider for yourself. If it's going to be detrimental to your well-being, of course, consider other venues, and there are many other ways that you can engage with your community. We haven't always been, doing science on social media. Also, certain subfields are more active than others, so it's worth considering that as well. And another disclaimer is if you do want to try this out, it can be a bit overwhelming at first. There's tons of information. It's very much a fire hose. But I think if you give it some time and you curate your network and you curate the sort of content that you're interested in, you can get this to sort of work for you. But certainly it's not something that will immediately be very intuitive. All right, so I've talked about must-have, strongly consider, and I would say here's a consider category. I might set up a ResearchGate page and a LinkedIn page. These are the sorts of things that you can at least set once and forget, even if you're not going to engage as much. Some communities are a little bit more involved on these platforms, some are not. But I'd say you might have further reach, especially if you're considering industry positions, by involving yourself on something like LinkedIn. All right. So there's also a number of community groups that you can be part of. Here's a few examples. There are a number of working groups and planning groups, for instance, for organizing conferences or the SIGs, which I think are fantastic. If you're interested in a software or an initiative, there are many opportunities to get involved. I would actually encourage you to consider something like an OHBM SIG or BrainHack, which is these groups tend to be very actively inclusive. So I think there are a lot of great opportunities to get started there. From my own personal experience, I had a really wonderful time with the OHBM, the Open Science Room Special Interest Group, and also with the BrainHack community over the past many years. That's opened a number of different doors for me, from large community-led publications to smaller collaborations that are happening even now. I also wanted to mention for the past, ooh, that's nice, thank you. Yes. I think that I've also been able to tap into some of these networks for things like when I've reached out for my own training grants to different people in the community or other collaborators on papers. I've been able to tap into some of those networks. But I've also sort of cold reached out to people before as well. Just, I really love your work. I think it's super interesting, and I think it's very relevant to what I have to do. And then I would encourage everybody who's interested or on the job market to join something called the Future PI Slack. That's been one of the most useful platforms for making the job market transparent for me and for a number of other colleagues. People are sharing information about navigating the job market, about hiring information as well, answering questions. This is a fantastic community group. So there can be, scientific community groups, and then there can be more professional development community groups. You can also look for what kind of works for you. And many of these groups often feature virtual meetings or online chats, which again lets you sort of asynchronously keep in touch with your community. So I'm not going to go over this. I just wanted to put this up in case anybody wants a small cheat sheet for reaching out. Feel free to take a picture if you've ever felt, kind of nervous about how you go about emailing somebody to join a project or, approaching someone at a conference. And then last thing I'll just say is it's nice to avoid negativity. When you first meet people, you never know who might be listening or who might be in touch with that person, or just in general, you put out kind of a negative vibe. It's nice to be a little bit more, positive at the beginning, at least. And then going with the flow is nice. Everyone has different styles. Your style might not click with someone else's style, and that's perfectly fine. All right, and then a note about encouraging international collaborations. How am I on time? Sorry, guys. I'm good? Perfect. All right. So there are a number of virtual communities that have a very strong international presence relative to other communities. And I'm thinking of something like BrainHack. And I'd say it really helps to join a community like BrainHack, you'll hear me say that a million times, that really prioritizes inclusivity. I think a lot of the SIGs also have a lot of that vibe as well. I mean, there's the Open Science Room group, which has a strong open community kind of focus. The student postdoc SIG, which also is very inclusive. Those are just a few that I've like directly touched, but others that I've sort of interacted with also seem to be very inclusivity oriented, which is, I think that's the best way to build your network if people are actively inclusive and interested in collaboration. Again, it's important to be sensitive collaborator time zones. Mac went over that in important detail. But it's just good to I have also showed up 15 minutes late to a talk that I was supposed to give because we didn't have the same exact understanding of when exactly the talk was going to start. And I realized 10 minutes in that they reached out and sent me an email and said, "Where are you?" So yeah, try to sort of double check those things and be extra sensitive when you have a number of people coming from a number of different time zones. You don't want to accidentally exclude people just because they're, in a different part of the world, which often happens. And it's important to try to understand and respect cultural differences as well. We all have sort of different ways that we're used to interacting with each other, but being a little bit more patient at the outset, maybe speaking a little bit more slowly for people who come from different language backgrounds, or putting on, live captioning in your video chats. There are a number of things like this that I think are very important to consider, just to make the initial onset of having people join your project as inclusive as possible. So I'll just outline a number of common challenges after I've talked about a number of ways that you can get engaged with your community. So one is extremely common to so many of us. It's overcoming anxiety. It's really hard to sort of put yourself out there. It's much easier to just sort of sit down and grab some ice cream by yourself or grab some coffee. But I'll say, it gets better the more you do it. It's one of those things that it's a skill like anything else. The more you stand up and give talks, the more you go out and meet people, just the better it gets and the more comfortable it will be. And you will also start to pay more attention to the positive aspects. Like we got to meet today. I got to chat with Katie beforehand in the awesome SP SIG. And you just, you get more of those opportunities and you get to appreciate the positive side of it the more you do it. Often these things can be quite exhausting. FOMO is very real, where you feel like you want to go to everything, but it's important to take breaks. You want to take care of your physical and your mental health. You're not going to meet everybody who's ever going to be relevant to your science and your career in one night. So just, take it slowly, do what works for you, and be very respectful of your own limitations. I'll say there's a special challenge for people who come from historically underrepresented groups. And there's no magic bullet solution to, the special challenges that we face. I will say that it's really important to find your community, just so that you do have a resource to go to for special, unique challenges. There are a number of specialized mechanisms. I'm not aware of all the international mechanisms, but in the US, for example, for postdocs, there's a Mosaic K99 mechanism and a Brain K99, which is also a professional development program as well. There are also some seminars that are specifically directed towards people from underrepresented backgrounds, such as Innovators in Cognitive Neuroscience and NeuroYes. And there are a lot of other opportunities like that. I'd encourage you to, I'm happy if you want to reach out to me for more opportunities like that, or look around. There are others in the community who have been involved in a number of different programs, and they would be happy to talk with you as well. And I'll also say, you might be interested in meeting somebody, and it might just not click. But that's the way it is. We go out and we make friends, and you just can't be friends with everybody. Our personalities aren't all the same. There are other fish in the sea. You will find people that you click with. You will find a community that works for you. You just have to look and sort of put yourself out there and meet people. If you don't meet people, you won't find your community. And then you're going to get lots of advice, like all the advice that you got here from my talk. I think it's a very important piece of advice that I've gotten again and again, which is to listen to all the advice you get, but don't take it all. See what really resonates for you. Maybe try something, and if it's not something that helps you, feel free to discard it. But certainly listen. So, quick conclusion, I would challenge you to try to engage a little bit more, especially if you're a postdoc. This is sort of a critical moment for your networking to get you to the next career stage, but it's also critical throughout your career. So try to maybe challenge yourself to engage just a bit more. There are a number of opportunities, but you don't have to do all of it. but anecdotally, it can really help to do something, especially for earlier career researchers. Then, most importantly, as I've said again and again, it's important to do what works for you. I believe in you. You can do it, and just have fun while you're doing it. All right. Thanks to my lab and everybody.